Guppies are a super common fish, but there are also some common mistakes that are made with them, and we're going to talk about the top 6 today with my friend Mike here in the fantastic fish room in Roseville, Minnesota.
Nice.
How you doing?
Good, thanks.
Good to see you. And we're surrounded by 70 tanks. 60 of them have guppies in them.
Yeah.
So I'd say you kind of know what you're talking about.
I love these fish. They're so easy to breed, but there are definitely common mistakes people make.
There's no doubt about it. Let's get into the first one. All right, mistake number 1 is too many fish. So Mike, we know that in aquarium keeping, too many fish is definitely a rule in general. However, what we're talking about here with respect to guppies is you might end up, if you don't know what you're doing or you're not careful, with more guppies than you expected, right?
Absolutely. They're called the millions fish because they multiply very easily. Normal gestation period is about 28 days. First thing is you always want to have 2 females for every male. And so again, that is 2 batches. And so bigger tank, the better. And if you don't want babies, all you can really do is just have males.
Well, and the males are the pretty ones with the big, you know, all the colors. So that's not too bad. Okay, mistake number 2 is only feeding one type of food. So what are we talking about here, Mike?
Well, first of all, guppies like both foods from plants and food from meat.
Okay.
So you want to have a variety of different foods. Some examples are there's freeze-dried food, which are great for nutrition. A lot of the foods now are frozen, which works out great. Also need to remember that for those babies, they need a smaller powder type of food. So don't forget that once your fish start breeding. Don't feed the same food over and over again or the same size over.
And keep in mind, you're probably going to want to feed the parents first. Otherwise, if you feed the babies first, the parents are going to take all their food.
That's what I do,
Okay.
is I just feed the parents first and then I'll feed the baby food. And of course, we forgot live food. So brine shrimp is a great food for both adults and babies.
So just for the health of the guppies, make sure you've got a few different types of food and you're just varying it every couple of days.
Variety, but don't overfeed because that's a separate problem.
Got it. All right, mistake number 3 is the wrong tank mates. Now, I know that this is a consideration generally in fish keeping, but when it comes to guppies, what are the types of fish? If I wanted to add other fish to my tank, what should I be thinking about?
Sure. This is a community tank. It's 40 gallon, and most of the fish in here are smaller fish, the same size as a guppy, and pretty much non-aggressive fish. So the biggest thing you want to stay away from when you're putting guppies into a community tank is tanks with barbs. Fin nippers are barbs. Large fish, like the huge angelfish, would see that little guppy as food.
Sure.
The other thing, goldfish are such a common fish, and unfortunately a lot of people think they're both common fish. They can be together. Definitely different water parameters and everything else. Don't mix guppies with goldfish.
Okay, mistake number 4 is the wrong filtration. Now, I know that a lot of the tanks in the studio, for me, Mike, are canister filters and hang on the back filters and things like that. Now, of course, cost is a consideration here, but I do see you running primarily sponge filters here, which seem to be doing a fantastic job, by the way, keeping your tanks looking great. But there must be a consideration with guppies as to why you've chosen to go with sponges. And what are the thoughts there?
The reason I'm going with sponge filters is the fact that those larger, like canister filters and hang on the back filters, especially if you're trying to keep your little babies, it's going to suck them in. They just don't have enough finnage power to not get sucked in. So sponge filters, great filtration.
Safety.
Safety, easy to run with the air. Easy to clean.
Makes sense, affordable. Now, of course, even with adults, having too high flow in your filtration can tire them out, right?
Yeah, with some of the finnage on these beautiful fish, the finnage makes it so hard just to keep that tail straight. And so I reduce the filtration, the amount of filtration, the power of the filtration.
And the flow, So coming up, so if you had a canister filter that's blasting out or a hang on the back, those little guppies are going to get tired, they're going to get stressed out, they're potentially going to get sick. So,
and of course, it all depends on the size of the tank too. Larger tank might be able to handle it. There would be a spot
because they've got places to go. Makes sense. Okay, mistake number 5 is not having floating plants in your tank. Now, I see that you don't actually have floating plants necessarily in every tank like this one, but you certainly do in a few of them. Why would we consider not having floating plants a mistake?
I guess to clarify the mistake, if you're trying to keep your fry, the mistake would be...
So if you're breeding guppies,
exactly,
you want to have floating
not
plants.
have floating plants or something else.
Okay.
So this tank, the babies, I've got enough.
They're big enough.
They're big enough.
Yep.
Most parents aren't going to eat the fry, so I'm not worried about it. It just makes it cleaner looking.
Sure.
This tank, these are some of my favorite fish, and so I really want to keep these fry alive.
Yeah.
You can see right now they're out in the open, but if a parent starts chasing them, they're going to go hiding into the floating plant. This floating plant is a redwood floater, one of my favorites. Live plants on the top because I haven't really found any good inexpensive floating plants. If anybody knows
that
of
are
any,
plastic or
exactly,
inexpensive,
yeah. So sometimes I'll just pull some of these out and put them on the top so they float. But it makes the babies feel safer, especially at eating time. You don't have that competition because they can find the food within the plants and the parents will eat the stuff that sinks.
So bottom line, if you're breeding guppies, make sure you're creating some kind of cover, safe haven for them. Floating plants is something the fry love.
Yeah, and to be totally honest with you, it also helps reduce the algae buildup. If you've got bright lights and the floating plants will diffuse the light and you don't have to worry about cleaning up so much algae.
It's a good general rule for all your fish tanks.
Exactly. Just in case your guppy's pregnant and you don't have any floating plants available, there are other options at your local pet shops. There's V-traps and then the net trap, which I really like because it gives them more space. Just put a bunch of plants in there and they can hide in there.
And mistake number 6 is mixing varieties. Now we must say that there's a caveat to this. It's not necessarily a mistake, but it could be a mistake. It kind of depends on your goals, right?
Correct. As I said, there's 50 different varieties right now in the fish room, and I want to keep pure strains. Most auctions aren't gonna allow for hybrids or mixes. There's a couple of challenges when you're trying to mix. Sometimes it's fun, but you get weaker fish if the fish keep breeding or interbreeding, it's called. So again, there's nothing wrong if you're setting up a community tank and want to have a bunch of beautiful guppies. That's great, but just don't really sell them to anybody unless you tell them they're a hybrid. You have no idea what male bred with what female. And that's how I ended up with 50 tanks of guppies because each one's kept separate.
So for you, you definitely are clearly going with specific species, but somebody who might want something like that needs to be careful not to mix.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So when my parents breed, it should look exactly like the parents. Whereas hybrids, you have no idea what you're going to get.
All right, so those are some pretty common mistakes, but I gotta ask you, you must have made a mistake or two in 50 or so tanks. What would you say is the biggest mistake you've made keeping guppies?
You're gonna make me tell this in front of all your viewers?
Yep.
Well, I will. With 70 tanks, sometimes I'm in a hurry to feed them, and instead of taking a pinch of flake food and dropping it in that 55, I just took the canister and let's say about 1/4 of the canister ended up in the tank.
Oh no.
3 hours later after doing a total water change and getting clear water back. So we all make them. It's just sometimes I'm in a hurry and I shouldn't be.
That's right. Well, look, if a master breeder here, award winner, can make some mistakes, we all can. It's just part of the journey.
Exactly. Makes the hobby fun.
That's right. We'll see you next time.